In the last lesson, I mentioned that having private members in the base class will cause some problems when we try to use those members or access those members in a derived class. Let me give you a demonstration of what that problem is. Let's go back to our base class employee. Let's add a function called gross pay, which will return the gross pay for an employee. For an hourly employee, which we're going to look at later, which we'll assume is how employees are paid, that will involve passing in hours and multiplying their pay rate times their hours, like so, and just returning that as the value or the return value for gross pay. And then we can use that in a program. We'll add it right here. Like so. Build and run the project. Oh, let's see, I forgot to pass the hours in. Fix that real quick. There we go. Let's put that where you can see it. So 40 hours at $15 an hour gives us a gross pay of $600. So now, we would like to use that same function in our derived class. The only problem is that it won't work for a manager because a manager is a salaried employee. So we're going to have to rewrite it. We're going to talk more about overriding functions later. But for now, we'll just assume that we're going to override it so that all it does is return their pay. It's a very simple, oversimplified function, but it's going to work for my demonstration purposes. So now we'll come down here. Add a call to gross pay for employee 2, and then when we build and run, we have an error. The error, which I'll pull up, right here says, error, double employee pay is private. Error within this context on line 68. If we scroll to line 68, we'll see that the problem is right here in our definition of gross pay, that we don't have access to pay because it's private. Let's go back up and look at employee again. Anytime a member is declared private, only the code within the definition of that class has access to the private data member. So even though manager is derived from employee, it does not have direct access to that member. There's one way to solve that problem, and that's to change the access level of name and pay from private to protected. The protected access level means that any data member declared as protected in a base class can be directly accessed by any derived class from that base class. So by changing the access level of pay from private to protected, now we can access it directly in the manager class right here. So let's rebuild the program, see if it works. Is that where you can see it? So now we have employee gross pay for the first employee is $600, and then EMP2 gross pay for the second employee is $1,500, which is just their monthly salary. This is not the only way to solve access problems. We could have used some type of function to provide access to the base class's pay member, but in many cases using the access level protected is much cleaner and easier to understand. Makes your code more simple and less complex. So that's an introduction to the protected access modifier. And in the next lesson, we're going to look at a couple more examples of how to use protected to be able to provide access to a base class's members in a derived class.